The morning of Margaret's memorial, I wore the tie she gave me for her 35th anniversary. Navy blue with small gold flecks. She picked it out herself at a little shop in Savannah during a trip we took just the two of us, before the kids were old enough to stay home alone. I remember she held it up to my face in the store and said, "This one. This is the one that makes your eyes look kind." I didn't argue. I never argued with her about things like that. That was 22 years ago. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror that morning, tying it the same way I always did. Left over right, loop through, pull snug, and I thought about how strange grief is. How it shows up in the smallest places. A tie. A coffee mug. The way the light comes through the kitchen window at 7 a.m. and hits the empty chair where she used to sit. My name is Lawrence. Lawrence Booker. I'm 64 years old, retired civil engineer, and I live in a 4-bedroom house in Decatur, Georgia, that is, by any reasonable standard, too big for one person. Margaret and I built a good life here. 38 years of marriage, 2 kids, our son Reginald, who is 41, and our daughter Paulette, who is 38. We put both of them through college. Helped Reginald with his first car, helped Paulette with her wedding. When Margaret got sick, I took early retirement to be home with her. No hesitation. That was 4 years ago. She passed 14 months before this story really begins. I don't say that to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because you need to understand the state I was in. Not broken, not fragile, but still putting myself back together. Still figuring out who Lawrence Booker was when he wasn't somebody's husband. I was walking again. Getting my footing. Starting to think about what the next chapter looked like. I had my pension. I had savings. Margaret and I had been careful our whole lives. Not wealthy in a flashy way, but solid. The house was paid off. I had a financial advisor I trusted. Life insurance had come through. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable, and I'd worked 37 years for that comfort. Reginald knew all of this. Of course he did. The memorial was at the house. Margaret's idea. Actually, something she'd mentioned before she passed. She wanted something small, personal, people who actually loved her, rather than people who felt obligated to show up. So we had maybe 40 people in the living room and backyard on a Saturday afternoon in October. Plates of food from the church ladies, her favorite Sade album playing low through the speakers, and the oak tree in the backyard just starting to turn. It was a good afternoon. Bittersweet in the way those things are. Reginald came with his wife Candace and their kids. Their youngest is 8 years old. Her name is Amara. This bright, serious little girl who has her grandmother's eyes and habit of listening to adult conversations with a focus that makes grown people uncomfortable. Margaret used to say, Amara saw things. I always knew what she meant. Candace spent most of the afternoon on her phone in the corner of the kitchen, which I noticed but didn't comment on. This wasn't the first time. Over the past year or so, I'd watched Candace become someone who seemed faintly inconvenienced by anything that didn't directly benefit her. It was a slow change, the kind you don't see coming until you look back and realize you can't remember when it started. Reginald, for his part, was warm that day. Attentive. He made sure my glass was full and checked on me every hour, which was more than usual. I appreciated it. I told myself he was just being a good son at a hard time. Toward the end of the afternoon, most people had gone. I was standing on the back porch with a glass of sweet tea, looking out at Margaret's garden. She'd planted hostas along the fence, and someone had been keeping them watered. I wasn't sure who, when Amara came and stood next to me. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, small and quiet, looking at the garden the way her grandmother used to. Then she said, "Grandpa, can I tell you something?" I looked down at her. Of course you can. She looked back toward the house. Checking, I realized later that her parents weren't watching. And then she looked up at me with those serious eyes and said, "I heard Daddy talking on the phone last week. He said he needs Grandma's house. He said you're too old to manage it, and he knows somebody who can help." I kept my face still. I've had a lot of practice at that. "Help how?" I asked. She shrugged, the way 8-year-olds do when they've said the most important thing and run out of words. "He said something about papers. He said you'd say yes because you trust him." Then her mother called her name from inside the house, and she looked at me one more time, that solemn, adult look, and went inside. I stood on that porch for a long time after that. I want to be clear about something. My first reaction was not anger. It was sadness. That's the part people don't tell you about betrayal. It doesn't always arrive hot. Sometimes it comes in cold and quiet, like water getting into a foundation. And you stand there feeling the chill and thinking, so this is what we've become. Reginald was my son. I coached his Little League team. I drove him to SAT prep on Saturday mornings. I sat in the waiting room for 6 hours the night Amara was born. And when they brought her out and put her in my arms, I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my own father died. This was that child's father. This was my boy. And he was planning something. Using words like manage and papers, and he'll say yes because he trusts me. Words that weren't the words of a son worried about his father. They were the words of someone who had done the math. I didn't let any of this show. I went back inside, thanked the last few guests, helped clean up, hugged my grandchildren, and walked Reginald and Candace to their car. Reginald hugged me at the curb and said, "Dad, you holding up okay?" And I said yes, I was fine. I'd call him in the week. I watched their taillights disappear down the street. Then I went inside and sat at the kitchen table and started thinking. I didn't call anyone that night. I've learned at 64 that the worst decisions get made in the hours right after you've been hurt. Instead, I made a list, the old-fashioned way, pen on paper, of everything I knew, everything I suspected, and everything I needed to find out. What I knew: Reginald and Candace had been having money trouble. I picked up pieces of it over the past 18 months. A comment about Candace's boutique not doing well. A mention of some investment that hadn't worked out. The way Reginald had started asking careful questions about my financial plans at family dinners. Questions that felt more like reconnaissance than conversation. What I suspected: someone had put the idea in his head that his aging father in a paid-off house with a pension and savings was a resource to be managed, not a parent to be loved. What I needed to find out: what papers Amara had heard mentioned, and who the somebody was who could help. I started with what I had access to. I'm not a suspicious man by nature, but I'm a methodical one. That's the engineer in me. I went through my mail carefully over the next 2 weeks. I noticed a letter from an estate planning firm I'd never heard of, addressed to me but clearly designed to look like routine correspondence, the kind of thing that a busy or distracted person might sign without reading carefully. I set it aside. I called my own attorney, a woman named Patricia who had handled our wills and the house deed for 15 years. I told her I'd received some unexpected correspondence about estate planning, and I wanted to review my documents and understand my options. She didn't ask questions. She said, "Come in Thursday." I came in Thursday. What Patricia told me over the next hour rearranged some things in my understanding. She explained what a durable power of attorney was, what it could do in the wrong hands, and how easy it was for someone to be pressured into signing one without understanding the implications. She talked about living trusts, about how to structure assets so that no single person can make unilateral decisions. She was matter-of-fact about all of it. She'd seen it before. That was the part that stayed with me. The way she said it without surprise. The way she'd clearly sat across from other people in my position. People who'd loved their children completely and been handed this. I updated my will that day. I also began the process of establishing a revocable living trust for the house and my savings accounts. I still hadn't said a word to Reginald. 3 weeks after the memorial, he called and said he wanted to come over for dinner that Sunday. "Just the two of us," he said. "Father and son, catch up properly." I said fine. I made his favorite, oxtail stew, cornbread, sweet potato pie. I set the table the way Margaret always did, with the good plates. He came in warm and easy, the way he always was when he wanted something. And we ate and talked about the Falcons and about the kids and about a fishing trip we'd taken together 15 years ago that somehow came up naturally in conversation. It felt, for stretches of that evening, like before, like when he was someone I didn't have to think carefully around. After dessert, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Dad, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." I put down my fork. "Go ahead." He talked for about 10 minutes. It was, I'll give him credit, a well-organized presentation. He was worried about me living alone in a house this size. He'd spoken to a financial consultant. A friend of Candace's, he said. Someone who specialized in helping people in my situation plan for the future. He thought it might make sense for me to give him limited financial oversight, just to make sure bills were paid and accounts were managed properly. Nothing dramatic, just a safety net. He slid a folder across the table. I looked at the folder. I didn't open it. "Reginald," I said. "Dad, before you say anything, Reginald." My voice was quiet. "I've never needed to raise it. Do you remember what you said to your mother when you were 17? When she found the report card you'd hidden?" He blinked. "What?" "You said, Mom, I was going to tell you. I just needed to figure out how." I looked at him steadily. "I always respected that. Even then, you didn't lie. You just hadn't figured out the right approach yet." He was quiet. "I need you to be honest with me right now," I said. "Not the version of honest where you figured out the approach, actually honest. How much debt are you and Candace carrying?" The silence lasted a long time. What came out over the next hour was not pretty. The boutique had failed. Fully, not partially. There was credit card debt I hadn't known about, a second mortgage on their house I absolutely hadn't known about, and money borrowed from Candace's parents that had apparently created its own crisis in that household. The financial consultant was someone Candace had found who'd suggested that my house, refinanced, could solve most of their immediate problems. The power of attorney document in the folder would have given Reginald the authority to make that happen. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. When he was finished, he looked like a man who had just put down something very heavy, and I understood that there was real shame in him, not just about the debt, but about this, about sitting across from his father at the table where he'd eaten 1,000 meals, and having to explain that he'd been willing to do this. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. I don't know how I got here." "I know how you got here," I said. "You got scared, and someone gave you an idea, and you didn't stop to think about what you were actually doing because you were too busy trying to solve the immediate problem." I paused. "That's how people end up somewhere they never intended to be." He nodded. His eyes were wet. "I'm not going to sign anything in that folder," I said. "And I need you to understand that I've already spoken to Patricia and made some changes that protect both of us. Protect you too, Reginald, from becoming someone who did this to his father." I slid the folder back across the table. "But I also need you to understand that I love you and that this conversation is not the end of us. It is, however, the end of the version of this where I pretend I don't see what's happening." He stayed for another 2 hours. We talked more honestly than we had in years, maybe in decades. He told me things about the marriage, about the pressure he felt, about the ways he and Candace had been trying to maintain a life that was bigger than what they could actually sustain. The neighborhood, the cars, Amara in private school, Candace's second business attempt. It was the conversation a son should have had with his father 2 years earlier, before it got here. I can't fix his marriage, I can't fix his debt with a signature, but I can be the fixed point. The thing that doesn't move. The next morning, I called Paulette and told her the outline of what had happened. Not to put Reginald in the ground. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't looking to create a war, but because she's his sister and she loves him, and sometimes you need someone close to you to say clearly, this cannot happen again. Paulette was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Daddy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right. Are you okay? Not financially, not legally. Are you okay?" I thought about that. I thought about standing on the back porch in October with a glass of sweet tea, listening to my 8-year-old granddaughter tell me something she shouldn't have had to know. I thought about sitting across from my son watching him try to find the words for something he was ashamed of. I thought about Margaret's tie, navy blue with gold flecks, hanging over the bathroom door. "I'm standing," I said. "That's the most honest answer I've got right now." "That's enough," she said. "That's more than enough." It's been 7 months since that dinner. Reginald and Candace are in financial counseling, real counseling, through a nonprofit credit service, not another scheme. They've started the process of selling their house and moving somewhere smaller. It's painful, I know that, but it's real, and real is what you build from. Candace is not my favorite person right now. I won't pretend otherwise. I think she understood more clearly than my son did what she was encouraging him toward, And that knowledge sits between us like a stone. But she's the mother of my grandchildren, and she's in the room trying to fix things, and I'll take that over the alternative. Amara stayed with me for a week last month while her parents were sorting out some logistics. We watched movies and made pancakes and walked around the neighborhood in the evenings, and one afternoon she was doing her homework at the kitchen table, and she looked up and said, "Grandpa, are you and Daddy okay now?" I sat down across from her. I thought about what to say. Not the lie, not the complicated truth, just the right thing. "We're working on it," I said. "That's what families do." She considered this with those serious eyes. Then she went back to her homework. Later that evening, I sat on the back porch alone with the lights off, just the sound of the neighborhood settling in around me, and I thought about what Margaret used to say whenever one of the kids went through something hard. She'd say, "You don't save people by giving them what they want. You save them by being the one thing they can't buy, can't borrow, and can't lose." I didn't understand that completely when she first said it. I think I do now. The hostas along the fence are doing well. I'm the one watering them. I've thought a lot about what kind of man I want to be at this stage in my life. Not the kind of man I was at 30, still sharp-edged and proving things. Not even the man I was at 50, steady, but maybe too trusting. I mean now, 64, alone in a house full of memory, trying to figure out how to carry everything I've earned, everything I've lost, and still walk upright. What happened with Reginald didn't make me bitter. I want to say that clearly because it matters. It would have been easy to go bitter. The story had all the ingredients. A grieving widower, a son who got lost, a daughter-in-law who saw opportunity where there should have been family. But bitterness is what happens when you stop trying to understand. And I don't have the luxury of stopping. Here's what I know to be true. The way things end up is almost never random. Reginald didn't wake up one morning and decide to be that man. He got there the same way most people get somewhere they didn't intend. One small compromise at a time, one avoided conversation, one problem kicked down the road until the road ran out. That's not fate. That's not some force working against him. That's just what happens when you let fear make decisions that courage should be making. And I'm not free of responsibility in that either. I raised him. I loved him in the way I knew how, which wasn't always the way he needed. Margaret was the one who could read what was underneath of Reginald, what the silences meant when the bravado was covering something fragile. After she was gone, I didn't step into that space the way I should have. I assumed he was fine because he looked fine. That's on me. What I'm most proud of, not the trust, not the legal documents, not the fact that I didn't get taken, is that I sat across from my son at that dinner table and I told him the truth without destroying him. That's harder than it sounds. When someone hurts you and you have the power to hurt them back, the discipline it takes to choose the longer road instead. That's not weakness. That is the hardest kind of strength there is. Amara taught me something without meaning to. An 8-year-old girl, weighing whether to tell her grandfather something her parents didn't want him to know, and choosing honesty anyway. She didn't have a strategy. She wasn't calculating. She just knew that what was happening wasn't right, and she said so. That's the kind of clarity that most adults spend a lifetime trying to get back to. I think about that a lot. I think about how much of our wisdom is really just unlearning the habits of self-protection we pick up along the way. The silence, the avoidance, the telling ourselves that things will work themselves out. They don't work themselves out. You work them out. Or you don't. And they work you. I'm watering Margaret's garden. I'm showing up for my grandchildren. I'm being the fixed point. The thing that doesn't move when everything else does. That's not a small thing. At 64, standing in your own backyard, still standing. That might be the whole thing.